Good Friday morning to you. It's sure good to be with you again this morning. My name is Mark Pierce. I am the pastor at Church Requel, and it's great to have you here for Matthew study number 52. 52 has always been one of my very favorite numbers ever since I played football in high school many years ago. So hopefully this Bible study will be a really good one for you and for me. Before I get into it, may I just also ask you if you know somebody who could benefit from this study, either downloading it as a podcast or checking it out at churchrequel.com or churchrequel.org, or going to either of the Vimeo or YouTube sites. I mean, I put it out there just about every place I know to make it easy for people to get to. Why not share it with somebody else and let them benefit from this time that we're having together? That would certainly bless my heart. Well, let's get into it, shall we? We're taking a look at Matthew chapter 4, and we're looking at verses 18 through 22, the calling of the first disciples. Let me just read this for you. Matthew chapter 4, verse 18. While walking by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets, and he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Now, a couple of things here that we just didn't have time to get to yesterday that I think is really worthwhile noting. We began to talk a little bit yesterday about the significance of a rabbi or teacher actually calling one of his students to come into discipleship with him, to be a follower. Usually this would be the kind of thing where someone would come and try out and qualify and maybe make it, maybe not. One current person that I like to listen to from time to time has said that it's likely that these young men, and they were very young by the way, we anticipate that all three of the four of these were probably teenagers at the time. Peter we estimate to be the oldest because he was married, and because later on we find that he's responsible for paying the temple tax. Well, not temple tax, excuse me, that's wrong. Had to pay the tax to the Roman government. Well, the only ones who had to pay the Roman tax were those who were 20 years of age and older. And the only two that that mattered to was Jesus and to Peter. So we get this idea that Peter is a little bit older than the others, but probably not much, and that these are really young men. The other person I was referring to earlier, the other teacher that has helped me to understand this, has suggested that Peter and Andrew and James and his brother John, by the very fact that they are still fishermen and are still in, at least James and John's case, their father's business, indicated that they really were not cut out to be disciples of a rabbi. If they could have done that, if they could have qualified, they already would have. Now that's pure speculation, and we'll never know that for sure one way or the other. But it definitely puts a different perspective on the calling here. You see, Jesus goes to these two sets of brothers and he extends the invitation to them. He calls them into following him, being his disciple. And we see their response, that they immediately left and followed Jesus. Well, that does sound a bit unusual, doesn't it? Well, if you have a historical perspective and you know how special the calling of a rabbi would be, or to be part of a famous rabbi, it begins to make a little bit more sense. The other thing that I think could definitely help us, and this certainly has more of a biblical backing to it, is if we go to some of the other Gospels and we look at the calling of the disciples from some of the different Gospels' viewpoints. Matthew here has a way of telling the story. Now, this isn't to suggest in any way, shape, or form that one gospel should be pitted against the other as to one being right and others being wrong. But I do believe that each gospel gives us a different lens through which to see a situation. For example, in the calling of the disciples, all four gospels talk about it: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew and Mark are very similar. In fact, most modern scholars believe that Matthew, actually, the writer of the Gospel of Matthew, used much of the material from Mark's Gospel to write his own. And particularly in this case, the wording is very, very similar, what we see here in Matthew chapter 4 and what we find in Mark chapter 1. However, we see a very big difference in the way John tells the story in John chapter 1 and the way Luke tells the story in, I believe it's Luke chapter 5. Now, let me give you just a couple of perspectives here. In John chapter 1, when Jesus is calling the disciples, or when he is extending the invitation to come follow him, in John's Gospel, John chapter 1, beginning in verse 35, we get this story that there were two disciples of John the Baptist. One of those was another John, the son of Zebedee, one of the Johns here that's being referred to in Matthew's Gospel, and also Andrew. Andrew and John are John the Baptist disciples. They're following John the Baptist. And John the Baptist says, when he sees Jesus, "Behold," and he calls him the Lamb of God. "Behold the Lamb of God." And we're told in John chapter 1, verse 37, that the two disciples heard him say this, and they followed Jesus. Again, referring to Andrew and John. Now, Andrew, following Jesus, then we're told, goes to, again, this is according to John's Gospel, goes to Peter. And he goes to his brother Peter, one of the two. Again, this is John chapter 1, verse 40. One of the two who heard John speak and followed Jesus was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. He first found his own brother Simon and said to him, "We have found the Messiah," which means Christ. And he brought him, meaning Andrew, brought Peter to Jesus. All right, so here we get the idea that there's a little bit of background here. When we look at just Matthew's Gospel, it kind of looks like, here's Jesus, a total stranger. He walks up to Peter and Andrew, and then later on to James and John, and a total stranger, and simply says, "Come, follow me." And they dropped their nets and everything, their business, their father, and just followed him. Well, actually, there probably was more to the story. They knew Jesus. They had heard Jesus teach. And the invitation to actually follow him, to be part of his ministry, was something that was totally captivating. It was an invitation that they simply could not turn down. And again, Jesus extends that same invitation to you and to me, doesn't he? Does he not come up to us, regardless of who we are, regardless of whether we could cut it someplace else or not, whether or not we could qualify for somebody else or not? Jesus comes to you and comes to me and says, "Come, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." We're going to talk more about the significance of being fishers when we come back tomorrow morning on Saturday. I can't wait to talk to you. Have a great rest of the day.